The fire took the workshop in the time it takes a pendulum to fall. Selina Wren stood in the narrow Clerkenwell Street and watched 11 years of her own hands turn to embers behind the window where, until that night, the most celebrated clocks in London had been made under her father's name and never once under hers. Somewhere inside the smoke, a long case clock struck an hour it would never strike again. She did not weep. She counted the strokes, because counting was the only prayer anyone had ever taught her. If this story holds you, follow it to the end, and tell us in the comments which city you are listening from. Some stories travel further than the people they are about ever could. By morning her father was dead of the shock. The debts were read aloud to her like a sentence, and the one thing in that workshop worth more than the building itself had vanished from the ashes as though it had never existed at all. If Selina's story has held you this far, don't disappear before the clock finishes striking. Subscribe, because stories like this only survive when someone stays to listen. The sign above the door had said Josiah Wren, horologist, in letters of honest gold, and for as long as Selina could remember, the sign had been a kind of lie she had agreed to tell. Her father had been a good man, and a fair one, with a steady temper, and a tradesman's gift for putting nervous lords at their ease. What he had not possessed, not truly, was the thing that made a clock more than a machine, that had always been hers. By the age of 12, she could hear a sick movement the way a physician hears a failing heart. By 16, she was cutting the wheels her father set his name to. By 22, she had drawn, in secret, across 40 sheets of paper, a marine timekeeper, with an escapement no maker in Europe had thought of. A clock that would keep true time on a pitching deck and tell a captain how far west of London he had sailed. The Board of Longitude paid fortunes for such a thing. Men had died chasing it. And Selina Wren, who could not be admitted to the worshipful company of clockmakers because she had been born a woman, had built it on a bench at the back of a Clerkenwell shop, while the gold letters above the door spelled out another person's name. She had never minded. That was the part she would later find hardest to forgive in herself. She had told herself that the work was its own reward, that the truth lived in the brass whether or not the world ever learned to read it, and she had gone on being the silent engine of a famous house, content to be unseen, because being seen had never once been offered. Then came the night of the fire. It began near midnight, in the room where the timekeeper was housed, and it burned with a speed that no spilled lamp could explain. Her father ran into the smoke for the chronometer, and was dragged out without it, and his great heart, which had carried so much that was not his to carry, simply stopped 3 hours before dawn. When the ashes cooled, the timekeeper was gone, not melted, gone, and in its place the debts came forward, debts she had never been shown, owed to a man whose name she did not yet know. And the bailiff put his seal on the door beneath the gold letters, and told her the house, and everything in it, now belonged to her father's creditors. She had a half-burned coat, a box of her own tools, and a grief she had no leisure to feel. She was standing in the gutted shop on the third morning, looking at the scorched place on the wall where the timekeeper had hung, when she heard a carriage stop in the street that was far too fine for Clerkenwell. A footman in dark green livery stepped down, looked at the ruin with distaste, and asked, in the tone of a man performing a duty beneath him, whether this was the establishment of the late Josiah Wren. On the carriage door was a crest she knew from the auction notices of the great collections, a silver hawk above a broken tower, the crest of the Earl of Avenel. The Earl of Avenel received her in a library the length of a chapel, where the light fell in long bars across more clocks than she had seen in one room in her life. They stood along the walls and on the tables, regulators and skeleton clocks and an orrery of tarnished silver, all of them stopped, all of them silent, so that the room had the held breath of a place where time itself had been told to wait. He did not rise when she entered. He stood already at the far end, a tall man of perhaps 32, dark-haired, with a face built for severity, and a scar like a pale thread running from his left brow into the hair above his ear. He looked at her the way a man looks at a delivery that has arrived in the wrong size. "You are the daughter," he said. "I sent for the maker." Then your man fetched the wrong house, my lord, or the right one. She kept her voice level. There is no other maker. There never was. Your father. My father is dead. And before he was dead, he set his name on my work, because that is how the world prefers its order. You may believe me or not, the clocks will not care either way. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite anger. He crossed to a table and laid his hand on a tall astronomical regulator, the grandest piece in the room, its dial a map of the heavens, its case black as a judge's gown. My father commissioned this from Josiah Wren, he said. It was to be the finest going clock in England. He died before it was finished. So did your father. It has stood silent in this house for 3 years, because no living man can complete it. The drawings are gone. The maker is gone. He looked at her without warmth. And now, a girl in a burned coat tells me she is what is gone. I am what is gone, she said. Prove it. She walked to the regulator. She did not touch it yet. She read it the way she had been taught to read, with her eyes, and then with the back of her hand held near the dead movement, as if she might feel its absent pulse. After a long moment she said, Your father's clock was never going to run, my lord. Not as it was built. The third wheel is half a tooth too fine for the pinion it drives. My father cut it that way on purpose, because he was afraid the design was too bold and wished to leave room to retreat. It has been waiting 3 years not for a maker, but for someone with the nerve to finish what was begun. She turned to him. I drew that design. I know its single flaw, because I am the one who left it there, against my own judgment, to spare an old man his fear. The Earl of Avenel went very still. There is no maker alive who could have told me that, he said quietly, which means either you are telling the truth, or you are the most dangerous liar I have ever let into this house. He studied her with a new and colder attention. I have been ruined once already, by a thing I believed was genuine and was not. I do not intend to be ruined twice. Then test me, she said, and stop telling me what I cannot be. He was silent. Then he reached into his coat and drew out a small object wrapped in chamois and set it on the table between them. And when he uncovered it, her breath stopped in her throat. It was a single brass wheel, scorched at one edge, and stamped on its rim was a maker's mark she had punched with her own hand. A mark no one in the world knew but her. A small wren, mid-flight. It had come, he told her, from the ashes of her father's fire, and it had been delivered to him, anonymously, the night before she ever walked through his door. She took the wheel in her fingers and knew it the way a mother knows a child's hand in the dark. It was from the timekeeper, the marine timekeeper, the one that had vanished, the one men would kill for. Someone had taken it from her father's workshop, broken from it a single proof, and sent that proof to the Earl of Avenel. Where did the rest of it go? She asked, and her voice was not quite steady now. That, said the Earl, is precisely the question I had hoped the maker would answer for me. He watched her face with the patience of a man accustomed to letting silence do his interrogating. You knew this piece. You went white. So there is something in my house that frightens you, Miss Wren, and I find I want very much to know what it is. She set the wheel down before her hand could betray more. It frightens me because it should not exist, she said. The thing it came from burned, or I was meant to believe it burned. She lifted her chin. Your father commissioned a regulator from my father, but somebody also wanted my father's other work badly enough to take it and set a fire to hide the taking. And then somebody sent you a piece of it. I should like to know, my lord, whether those somebodies sleep under your roof. It was, she would think later, an unforgivable thing to say to an earl in his own library, and she watched him decide whether to have her thrown into the street for it. He did not. Instead, a muscle moved in his jaw, and he said, You will finish my father's clock. You will live in this house while you do it, under my eye, where I may judge for myself whether you are a maker or a thief. I will pay your father's debts, which I have already taken the trouble to purchase, so that you understand precisely whose mercy you stand in, and in exchange you will tell me everything you learn about how that wheel came to my door. He let the silence settle. You wish to find your timekeeper. I wish to know who has been moving through my affairs like a draft under a door. We want the same thing. Do not mistake that for friendship. I never mistake anything for friendship, my lord, she said. It is the one economy I was raised in. She thought she saw, very briefly, the ghost of something that was not displeasure. That evening, she was given a narrow room above the stables and the freedom of the workshop wing, and she was crossing the great cold hall to it, when a door opened, and an old woman in black surveyed her from the bottom of the stairs with eyes like 2 chips of jet. The Dowager Countess of Avenel, the Earl's grandmother, did not introduce herself. She did not need to. She looked at Selina's burned coat and her toolbox, and the soot that no washing had quite got out from under her nails, and she said, in a voice dry as paper, "So, my grandson has brought a tradesman's girl into the house, and calls it a commission. I have buried 2 clever men in this family, child. I will not bury its name as well. Whatever you imagine you are, you will be gone by spring." Selina inclined her head with perfect courtesy. "Then I had better work quickly, my lady." She climbed the stairs to her room, lit her own candle, and did not sleep. Because she had recognized something the dowager did not know she had recognized. The old woman's mourning ring, set with a single dark stone, was the twin of one she had seen before, on the hand of the man to whom her father had secretly owed every penny of those ruinous debts. The astronomical regulator gave her a reason to be in every room of the house, and she used it without shame. She came to know the Earl across the long bench where the clock now lay open between them, and she found, to her irritation, that he was not the ornament she had expected a great man to be. He understood his collection. He asked questions a fool could not have asked. He had been, she learned, the patron of half the instrument makers in London, until the day a celebrated dealer sold him a regulator sworn to be the work of Thomas Tompion himself, and the Earl had displayed it before the whole of fashionable society, and a quiet visitor from the company had turned it over and shown the room, gently, mercilessly, that it was a forgery. The scar above his brow, she gathered, had come from a riding fall the same season, but the deeper wound had come from that drawing room, and it had never healed. He had built a wall around authenticity the way other men build walls around money. "You despise me for caring whether a thing is real," he said one evening, watching her depth the wheels. "I despise no one for caring whether a thing is real," she said. "I have spent my life being a real thing that no one would call by its name. We are nearer to one another than you would like, my lord." He was quiet for a long moment. "Tell me when I am wrong," he said abruptly. "I am surrounded by men who agree with me. It is the loneliest condition I know." "You are wrong about the going train," she said at once. "You have been about to ask whether we might lighten the pendulum. We may not. You are confusing weight with steadiness. They are not the same thing." She did not look up. Most men confuse them. She heard him exhale, and it was almost laughter, and she found she had to bend lower over the work so that he would not see her face. The rumors began that same week. Lady Marguerite Selby, a polished and clever woman whom all the world had long since married to the Earl in its imagination, came to call and went away, and by the following Sunday it was understood across 3 drawing rooms that the Earl of Avenel had installed his late clockmaker's daughter in his house for reasons that had nothing to do with clocks. Selina heard the talk the way she heard a movement running fast, as information. She did not let it touch her hands. What touched her hands was what she found on the 9th night, when she could not sleep and went down to the workshop and unlocked, with a key she had quietly copied, the cabinet where the Earl kept the papers of his father's commissions. Folded inside, in her own father's hand, was a letter she had never seen, and clipped to it, impossibly, were 3 sheets of drawings she knew better than her own face. They were her drawings, the marine timekeeper. The plans she believed had burned. They had been in the Earl of Avenel's house all along. She did not confront him quietly. She had spent her whole life being quiet, and it had bought her a burned coat and an unmarked grave. She came to the library at midnight with the drawings in her fist and laid them on the desk in front of him and said, "Explain to me, my lord, how the work that was stolen from my father's shop has been sleeping in your cabinet, and why I should not walk to the magistrate at dawn." He looked at the drawings. She watched his face for the flush of a guilty man, and saw instead the white shock of a man who has been handed a knife and told it came from his own kitchen. He turned the sheets over slowly. "These were sent to my father," he said, 11 months ago, by a hand I did not know. My father is 3 years dead, Miss Wren. He cannot have hidden them, which means someone has been using my house and my dead father's name as a strongbox." He raised his eyes, and for the first time she saw past the wall to the man behind it, and the man was furious in a cold, dangerous way that had nothing to do with her. "Someone in my own affairs took your work and meant for it never to be found. You did not bring this rot into my house. You have only let me smell it." She had come ready to fight him. She had not come ready for the floor to shift beneath her like that, for the enemy to step suddenly to her side. "There is a way to settle what you are," he said, rising, "and to settle it before all of London, so that no Lady Selby may ever spread filth about you again." He looked at the regulator, very nearly finished now beneath her hands. "In a fortnight I hold the assembly my family has held every winter for 100 years. Every collector of note will be in this house. The master of the worshipful company will be in this house. I had intended to unveil my father's great clock, and to name the man who made it." He met her eyes. "I will name the maker truly. I will name you. They will not believe you," she said. "A woman cannot be a maker. The company has rules older than your family. Then we shall give them something their rules cannot argue with," he said. "We shall let the clock speak." The night of the assembly, the long library blazed with 1,000 candles, and the regulator stood in the center of it, veiled in black silk, and society pressed in scented and glittering and hungry for a spectacle. The dowager watched from her chair like a hawk on a perch. Lady Selby smiled the smile of a woman holding a pin behind her back, and among the dark coats stood Master Skeen of the clockmaker's company, a heavy, comfortable man with a comfortable man's certainty, who had known Josiah Wren for 30 years and had, Selina would have sworn, never once in those years been afraid of anything. The Earl drew the silk away. The dial of the heavens shone. He set the pendulum swinging with his own hand, and the great clock, silent for 3 years, began to beat, steady as a true heart, and a sound went through the room like wind through wheat. And the Earl of Avenel turned to the assembly and said, in a voice pitched to carry to the farthest candle, "This is the finest going clock in England. It was finished beneath my roof, in my sight, by the maker who designed it." He held out his hand to Selina. "Not Josiah Wren, his daughter, Selina Wren. Whatever your rules tell you, the brass does not lie, and neither, tonight, will I." The room turned to her as one creature, and into the silence, before she could take his hand, Master Skeen began, very softly, to laugh. "My lord," he said, "before you ruin your house for a clever girl, perhaps these good people should hear the truth about her sainted father, the truth about the money, and about the thing he stole from this company, which we have very lately recovered, and which proves him the thief he was." The word thief moved through the room like a dropped match through dry grass. "Josiah Wren," said Master Skeen, warming now to his audience, "died owing a great sum to a man of business who acted for certain members of our company, a sum he could never have honestly earned. Where do you suppose a Clerkenwell tradesman found the means to live as he lived? I will tell you. He sold us false work and true secrets, and when the secrets ran dry, the debts came due, and the fire that took his shop took our patience with it." He spread his soft hands. "I am sorry to wound the young person, but a forger's daughter is a forger's daughter, and no earl's protection makes brass into gold." It was beautifully done. Selina, standing in the candlelight with her hand still half raised toward the earl's, understood with a cold clarity that the man was lying, and that the lie was better than the truth, because the truth was complicated and the lie was simple, and a room full of frightened people will always choose the simple thing. She did not take the Earl's hand. She stepped instead toward Master Skeen, and the room held its breath. "You say my father owed a great sum," she said. Name the man of business who holds the debt. A flicker. That is hardly. Name him. You knew the debt to a penny just now. Surely you know the creditor. She turned to the assembly, and her voice did not shake, because hands that have never been allowed to tremble at a workbench do not learn to tremble in a drawing room. I will tell you what I know, since the master is suddenly shy of names. My father owed money, yes. He owed it because his shop required materials he could not afford, because he was secretly funding work that frightened powerful men, and because a creditor I never met advanced him exactly enough to keep him building and not 1 shilling more. A man does not lend to a forger. A man lends to a maker he wishes to keep on a chain. She looked back at Skeen. You have not recovered stolen company property, sir. You have recovered a marine timekeeper that I designed, that was taken from my father's burning shop, and that you cannot afford to let the Board of Longitude ever see working, because if it works, every patron in this room will know that the finest timekeeper in England came not from the company's masters, but from a woman the company would not admit to sweep its floor. The silence now was a different silence, the hungry kind. Master Skeen's comfortable face had gone the color of tallow. This is hysteria, he said. This is arithmetic, said Selina. I do it better than you. Ask anyone here whose clock keeps the truest time. She would have said more. But across the room she caught sight of a face she had not expected, half hidden by the press of guests near the door. Davy Roan, her father's journeyman, the boy she had taught herself, who had wept at the graveside and whom she had believed lost to the workhouse with the rest of the broken household. He was here, in this house, in a coat too good for him, and when her eyes found him he flinched as though she had struck him, and he turned, and he pushed back through the crowd toward the dark of the hall. She went after him without a word to anyone, even the Earl, even with the whole of London still turning her father's name over on its tongue. She caught Davy at the foot of the servant's stair, gripped his sleeve, and felt him shaking. "How are you in this house, Davy?" she said. "Who brought you here?" And the boy looked at her with a face full of such terror and such shame that she understood, before he said a single word, that whatever answer was coming would break something she had been standing on without knowing it was there. "I never meant the fire," Davy whispered. "I swear it on my mother, Miss Selina. I only opened the door." She made him sit on the cold stone step. She made her own voice gentle, because the fastest way to lose the truth was to frighten it back down his throat. "Who told you to open the door?" "A gentleman, last autumn. He came to the shop when the master was at the exchange. He knew things, miss. He knew about the sea clock when no one was meant to. He said the master was in debt past saving, and the kind thing, the merciful thing, was to let the clock be taken quiet, so the master could pay what he owed and keep his name. He gave me money. He said no one would be hurt." Davy's whole face crumpled. "He said the door, that was all. Leave the workshop door off the latch one night and walk away. I didn't know about the lamp. I didn't know they'd burn it. I didn't know the master would." He could not finish. "This gentleman," Selina said. "Describe him." Quiet spoke. "Older, a scar by his eye, like the Earl's. Only the other side. He wore a ring, miss, a dark stone. And the boy stopped, because Selina had risen to her feet. A scar like the Earl's, only the other side. A dark stone ring, the twin of the dowager's. A man who knew the family blood and the family jewels because he carried both." She walked back into the blazing library on legs that felt like another woman's, and she found the Earl waiting for her at the center of the wreckage of his own assembly, the guests dispersing into corners to whisper, Master Skeen already cloaked and gone. The Earl came to her at once. "Where did you go?" he said, low. "You left me standing in the middle of my own ruin." "My lord," she said, and for the first time since she had entered his house, her composure failed her. Just at the edges, just enough for him to see. "I know who burned my father's shop. I know who has been using your dead father's name. I know who sent you the wheel." She drew a breath. "And I am very much afraid, Lord Avenel, that he is your blood, and that proving it will cost you the one thing you have spent your whole life protecting, your house's name." The Earl's face did not change. but she felt the cold come off him like a window opened in winter. And he said, very quietly, "Say the name." Before she could, a voice spoke from the doorway behind them, smooth and unhurried. A voice she had heard for the first time only minutes ago, in a frightened boy's description. "There is no need," said the man in the doorway. "I expect she means me." He stepped into the light, older than the Earl, with the family's dark hair gone to iron, and the family's bones in his face, and a scar by his right eye, and on his hand a dark stone ring. The Earl's uncle, his father's brother, the man who had administered the Avenel estate through 3 years of the Earl's grief, the man who signed his dead brother's papers, the man whom the Earl, she would learn, had trusted as he trusted no one else alive. "Hugh," said the Earl, just the one word, and in it she heard a whole childhood. "I did it for the family, Lucian," said Hugh Avenel, with the terrible calm of a man who has long since persuaded himself. "I always do everything for the family. Your father would have understood, if he had lived. He nearly ruined us patronizing tradesmen and their toys. I merely finished protecting what he could not." He smiled, and it was a kind smile, which was the worst thing about it. "And I have one final protection in hand. Tomorrow morning a magistrate I have known for 20 years will swear an information against Miss Wren for the theft of company property, and the murder of her own father by arson." He inclined his head to Selina, almost courteous. "Her hanging will be very sad, and very quiet, and the family name will never appear in it at all." This was the hour Selina had always known was coming, in the way she had always known a movement would fail at the point of greatest load. She had built her whole life to withstand it, and she stood now in the candlelight and felt it press on every joint of her. Hugh Avenel had the law, the money, and the family's instinct for self-preservation all on his side. She had a frightened boy, a scorched wheel, and a clock, and she watched the Earl of Avenel stand between his uncle and the woman he had named before all London, and she saw, with a grief she had not expected to feel on his behalf, the exact moment the man understood what it would cost him to choose her. To prove Hugh guilty was to confess to the world that the House of Avenel had murdered a maker and hidden the deed under the dead Earl's honored name. It was to take everything Lucian had built his identity upon, his father's memory, the family standing, the wall he had raised around his own wounded pride, and pull it down with his own hands in public view. He did not choose at once. That was the truth she would carry. He hesitated. She saw the hesitation, and it cut her more cleanly than Hugh's threat had, because she had let herself begin, against all her training, to believe she would not have to stand alone in the worst room of her life. "Lucian," said Hugh softly, pressing the advantage, "send her away. Pay her debts as a kindness. Settle a sum on her, and let her vanish to the country. No one need hang, no one need know. The clock is yours, the credit is yours, the name is safe. I am asking you to do nothing at all, only to look away, as men in our position have always been permitted to look away." And Selina, who had spent her life being the thing men looked away from, gathered the last of her steadiness, and said to the Earl, not to plead, but to release him, "He is right that it would be easier. I have always been easy to unsee. I will not hate you for it, my lord. I was unseen before I met you, and I built a true clock in the dark, and I will build another. You owe me nothing." She picked up her toolbox from where it had stood all evening by the regulator. "Choose your house. It is the only one you have." She had reached the door when his voice stopped her. "Stay where you are, Miss Wren." The Earl had turned to his uncle, and the wall was gone from his face entirely now, and what was underneath it was not pride at all, but something harder and cleaner. "You ask me to do nothing," he said to Hugh. "You forget that I have done nothing for 3 years, and called it grief, and let you run my house and my father's name through your hands like water, because it was easier than looking. I have just watched a tradesman's daughter stand in a room full of people who despise her, and tell the truth at the cost of her own neck. I find I am ashamed to be the only Avenel in this room who would do less." He stepped toward his uncle. "You will not go to your magistrate. You will go nowhere. The fire you set killed a good man, and the lie you told used my father, who loved that good man, who would sooner have lost the estate than harmed him. You did not protect his name, Hugh. You wore it like a coat over a knife, and I am going to take it back from you in front of the same world you used it to deceive." Hugh's calm cracked at last, and what showed beneath it was very ugly and very afraid. "You have no proof," he said. "A servant's word, a girl's arithmetic. You will be laughed out of every house in England." "Then it is fortunate," said the Earl, "that I have a fortnight and a clock that tells the truth, and the only maker in the world who can prove who built it." He looked at Selina, and the look was a vow. "The Board of Longitude tests timekeepers at Greenwich at the turn of the month. We will enter hers. We will let her sea clock keep its true time before the most exacting men in the kingdom, and when it does, every word she has spoken tonight becomes a fact no magistrate of yours can hang." He turned back to his uncle. "You wanted the clock buried because it would expose you. Instead, it will be your judge." And from her chair in the corner, where she had sat silent through the whole of it, the Dowager Countess of Avenel rose to her feet, leaning hard on her stick, her jet eyes fixed not on her grandson, but on her younger son, and she said in a voice like the closing of a heavy door, "Hugh, give me your father's ring. You have disgraced the hand that wears it." The dowager, who had promised Selina she would be gone by spring, became in a single night the most formidable ally Selina had ever possessed. She did not announce the change. She simply appeared in the workshop the next morning, sat herself in the best chair, planted her stick before her, and said, "I have been wrong about a great many things for a great many years, child, and I have not the time left to be wrong about this one. My son murdered a man to keep my family comfortable. I will spend whatever remains of my consequence in this city to see your clock proven and his lie buried. Now tell me what you require, and do not waste my afternoon being modest about it." What Selina required was the timekeeper itself, and the timekeeper was in the hands of Master Skene. They got it back not by law, which Hugh still had threads in, but by the dowager's terrible memory. She remembered that Skene's wife had been born a draper's daughter and married up. She remembered a debt of gratitude Skene's family owed hers from 40 years before. She remembered, above all, that a comfortable man fears the loss of comfort more than he fears the law. She called on Master Skene herself, alone, and she did not raise her voice. And she came away in 2 hours, with the marine timekeeper wrapped in chamois on the seat beside her, and she never told a living soul precisely what she had said. Selina opened the case with shaking hands and found it whole. Scorched, jarred, neglected, but whole. For 3 nights she did not sleep. She cleaned and adjusted and brought it slowly back to true. The Earl beside her at the bench more often than not, holding the light, asking the questions only she could answer, learning the work the way a man learns the language of someone he has decided to love. They spoke little. They did not need to. The silence between two people bent over the same true thing is its own kind of vow. "You hesitated," she said to him once, near 3 in the morning, because she was not a woman who left a flaw uncut. "Last night, before you chose, I saw it. I did," he said. He did not insult her by denying it. "For perhaps the length of a breath, I weighed my father's memory against your life, and I am not proud of the breath it took me. I will not lie to you about it. You above all people I will not lie to." He looked at her across the lamp. "But I want you to understand that what I chose with my eyes open. Hugh asked me to do nothing, and nothing is what I have done my whole life. You have made it impossible. I find I do not want it to be possible again." She bent back to the work so that he would not see her face, and for once it was not to hide that she was unmoved. On the 3rd night, with the timekeeper running sweet and true, and the Greenwich trial 2 days off, she came down to the workshop to find the bench overturned, the lamp smashed, and the chamois empty. The marine timekeeper was gone again, and pinned to the wall where it had hung was a single sheet of paper, in Hugh Avenel's hand, that read only, "A clock that does not appear cannot be proven. Run to your country, girl, while there is still a road." Greenwich on the morning of the trial was bright and bitter. the river a sheet of hammered tin, the observatory on its hill watching the city the way Selina's father had once watched the sky. The board's commissioners sat at a long table in a cold-paneled room. Men of the sciences, men of the admiralty, men with no patience for spectacle and no mercy for failure. They had been told there would be a marine timekeeper to test. There was no marine timekeeper. There was Hugh Avenel, attending as a gentleman observer, his face composed into grave concern, a magistrate at his side, and the whole machinery of his patience ready to close the moment Selina Wren stood before that table with empty hands, and was revealed as exactly the fraud the simple story said she was. The Earl of Avenel rose to speak, and Hugh's small smile said he expected a young man to bluster and fail. "My lords," said the Earl, "you were promised a sea clock. It was stolen from my workshop 2 nights ago by a man in this room, who has stolen it twice now and burned a maker to death to keep it from your sight, because he knows what you will know the moment it runs." A stir went down the table. "I cannot lay the clock before you. He has seen to that. But I can lay before you the next best thing, which is the only person on earth who can build it again from nothing, and prove she built the first by building it twice." He turned, and Selina rose. On the table before her she set her box of tools and a single sheet of paper, blank. "My lords," she said, "I cannot show you the clock. I can show you the mind that made it." And she took up a pen, and before the most exacting men in the kingdom she drew the escapement from memory, every wheel and pallet and curve of it, naming the function of each as her hand moved, the novel scape that no company master had thought of, and no forger could have invented, because a forger copies and only a maker creates. She drew it whole. Then she drew its single deliberate flaw, the half-tooth her father had begged her leave in for safety's sake, and she explained why it was there, and how it might be cured, and she watched the oldest commissioner, a man who had spent 50 years among instruments, lean slowly forward over the page like a man hearing his own language spoken in a foreign land. "No one drew this for you," the old man said. "It was not a question. No one in the world could have, my lord," she said. "That is rather the point." Hugh Avenel rose then, smooth to the last. "This is a charming performance," he said, "but a drawing is not a clock, and a clever girl with a stolen sketch." "The sketch is in her head, sir, where you could not burn it," said the old commissioner, without looking at him. "I have examined 1,000 makers. I know the difference between a hand that copies and a hand that knows. Sit down." And then Davy Roan, the journeyman, who had been brought to Greenwich by the dowager and kept until this hour, stood up at the back of the cold, bright room and confessed before the board and the magistrate and God how he had been paid by the gentleman now standing, how the door had been left off the latch, how the fire had been set, how the wheel had been broken from the clock, and how the clock had been carried away by Hugh Avenel's own men, twice. He wept the whole way through it, and his weeping was worth more than any oath, because no one in that room had ever seen a liar weep like that. The magistrate at Hugh's side took one step away from him, and then another. It was, in the end, very quiet, exactly as Hugh had once promised a hanging would be, only it was the wrong man it closed around. The board ordered the timekeeper recovered and tested at the Crown's expense. The magistrate's information was turned, that same hour, against Hugh Avenel for arson and the death of Josiah Wren, and the old commissioner, before the room rose, asked Miss Selina Wren whether she would consent to oversee the testing of her own instrument, since plainly no other living soul was fit to. She heard the words. She wrote them in the small notebook she had carried since the fire, because she needed to see them in ink to believe them. Then, in the cold, bright room, with the river shining beyond the windows, the Earl of Avenel crossed the floor to where she stood. He did not kneel. They were not in a ballroom, and she would have despised a performance. He simply took her ink-stained hand in both of his, before the commissioners and the magistrate and the ruin of his uncle, and said, so that the whole room heard it and he plainly did not care, "Whatever they put on the dial of that clock, I should like my name beside yours on it. Not above, beside, if you will have a man who hesitated for the length of one breath and has every intention of spending the rest of his life making up for it. She did not answer him at Greenwich. She made him wait until the work was done, which he understood, because by then he understood her. The timekeeper was tested through the worst of the spring weather, and the board declared it true to a standard no clock had reached before it. Josiah Wren's name was cleared in the same notices that printed his daughter's, and for the first time the two names stood together in honest gold, the lie and the truth at last telling the same story. Hugh Avenel did not hang. The family's consequence, even in disgrace, bought him exile instead, a cold house in a colder country, and a name he was forbidden ever to use again. The dowager attended his sentencing in full mourning, sat very straight throughout, and never afterward spoke of him at all, except once, to Selina, when she said, "I gave the world 2 clever sons, and it kept the cruel one. You I would have kept instead," which from that woman was a confession of love so total it left Selina unable to speak for a full minute. Lady Marguerite Selby called again, and was received, and discovered that the woman she had tried to bury and gossip was now the most talked-of maker in London and the openly acknowledged choice of the Earl of Avenel. And being a clever woman, she changed her tune within the quarter hour. "I confess I never imagined it," she said, with a smile that had learned humility the hard way. "A woman and a maker, and to be a countess besides." "I have not agreed to be a countess," Selina said. "I have agreed to be a maker. The rest is under discussion." Master Skene resigned the mastership of the company before he could be put out of it, and the worshipful company of clockmakers, faced with a woman whose timekeeper the crown itself had certified, discovered in its ancient rules a flexibility no one had previously suspected, and admitted Selina Wren not to sweep its floors, but to sit among its makers, the first of her sex to do so, and not, she intended, the last. And the Earl came to her in the workshop on a green evening in May, when the great regulator stood finished and ticking in the library, and the marine timekeeper was at sea proving itself off the coast of Spain, and he sat across the bench from her with no particular business, and she looked up and said, "What is it?" "Nothing," he said. "I wish to be in the same room." She set down her file. She had spent her whole life waiting to be seen, and had taught herself, out of necessity, to need no one's eyes. This man had crossed a cold, bright room for her in front of the people who could ruin him, had pulled down his own house rather than look away from her, had asked for his name beside hers and not above. She had tested him at the worst load a heart can bear, and he had held. "You may have your name beside mine on the dial," she said. "Not above. Beside," he agreed gravely. "Always beside. And the rest," she said, "is no longer under discussion." He came around the bench then, and she let him, and the silence that held the two of them in the lamplight was not the silence of a thing performed, but of a thing finished true. But the truest measure of what had changed was not in the library, nor in the church where they married that midsummer with the dowager weeping into her black silk, and Davy Roan, pardoned and apprenticed anew, holding the ring. It was in the gold letters that went up the following spring, above a small new shop in Clerkenwell, on the very street where the first one had burned, letters that for the first time in the history of that trade spelled out a woman's name to be read by anyone passing. The story of Selina Wren does not end with a wedding, because she would have considered that a poor place to stop a story, the wheels barely engaged. It ends, if it ends at all, in a workshop that smells of oil and brass and beeswax. On an ordinary morning, with the long light coming through the window and falling across a bench where a woman sits cutting a wheel by her own hand for a clock that will bear her own name. Around her there are girls. Not many at first. The world was not yet built to spare them. But there are girls, daughters of drapers and watchmen, and one of a duke, bent over their files with the particular fierce silence of people who have been told all their lives that the work was not for them and have decided to find out for themselves. Selina teaches them the way her father never quite dared to teach her, openly, in the daylight, under a sign that does not lie. Across the room, more often than the world thought a great man had any business to be, sits the Earl of Avenel, who has discovered in his middle years a contentment he had spent his youth mistaking for boredom, and who comes to the workshop with no errand at all except to be in the same room as the truest thing he has ever owned and does not own, because she belongs to no one, which is precisely why he loves her. On the wall hangs the marine timekeeper, retired now from the sea, keeping perfect time. On its silver dial there are two names, neither above the other. She had spent so many years being the unseen engine of a famous house, telling herself the work was reward enough, that the truth lived in the brass whether or not anyone read it. She had been wrong about one thing only. The truth had always lived in the brass, but she had needed, in the way every soul needs, to be read. She was read now, not because she had made herself smaller to be let in, nor because she had waited, patient and lovely, for a powerful man to lift her up. She was read because she had kept building in the dark, until the dark could not hold what she had made, and because one man at last had the courage to cross a cold, bright room and say her name aloud in front of everyone who had decided not to learn it. She took up the next wheel. Outside, somewhere down the street, a church clock began to strike the hour, and then another, a little behind it, and then a third, all the clocks of Clerkenwell telling the same time in slightly different voices, and Selina Wren, who had given the city its truest hour, smiled and did not look up from her work. And if you reached the end and felt even a little something for Selina, then don't leave her story unseen again. Subscribe, stay with us, and let the next forgotten woman be remembered too.